I haven't done Python in like several years.
I like Python. Wait, didn't you do it last year?
We did use Python last year. We used Python 2 last year.
Okay.
So that was the first time we had done anything with Python.
Oh, really? Okay.
All right. So last time, am I recording? Yep. We had this idea of our dice collection where when we created a dice collection given a formula, we then told it to roll itself. So rolling that thing generated a recent sum and a recent rolls, right? Mm-hmm. And then we also did wrote a function for remove worst that would kind of whittle that down to a smaller number of rolls. I just want to make sure that guy is still working because we wrote that 2 or 3 different times, and just want to make sure it's still in a. Yep. Okay. So we initially rolled our 203 d20s. So got 2140, and here's all the individual rolls. Then we rolled it again. Then we removed, it looks like the top 100, and here's that. I think this last solution, wasn't this V's version of this, remove worst. We create our own min function and remove that one thing. So that this particular approach did not require sorting, right? So a pretty inefficient approach to this, but that's fine. It doesn't matter. It's still fast enough for us. Okay, so ultimately, we now have this dice collection that allows us to have, to roll some dice. Now what we'd like to have is we'd like to create another object for like a player and have players fight each other to the death. Okay, but players are going to have a dice collection. So just like in real life, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, you show up with your own little bag of dice. And you can now roll various rolls, okay? And you're going up against somebody else. So we're gonna create a player, and let's do this at kind of a design level, and then we'll actually write this. Okay. So we're going to create what we think is a player. We want to start thinking about what a player is going to have in our world. So maybe a player has a name, right? Now, a player probably also has, if we're kind of thinking about a player fighting another player, they need to have some amount of life points. So in games, this is typically called hit points. So a player will have HP or hit points. I don't know. In RPGs, it's usually called HP, but health is fine. Whatever you want to call it. You know, same thing. We're going to have some number that counts down to 0. When it's 0, it's bad. All right? That's going to be the deal there. All right. So we'll have a name, and we're going to have a hit points. So these are the 2 fields that we're going to keep track of. So I'm going to go ahead and label these guys as fields. That is, these are variables that belong to the class. All right? That's what a field is. So I'll even define it up here. This is a variable that belongs to the class. All right? Now, we also need to have some functions that we're going to write here. All right, so if we think about this fight going back and forth, when a player is fighting against another player, well, somewhere in there we're going to have to take turns, right? We're not going to allow in our current model, or our first model at least, for one player just to beat up on the other one, and the other one never gets a chance to fight back. So one of the players will go first, and they'll take a swing, and then the other guy will take a swing, and then the other guy will take a swing, so on and so forth. So we need to have the ability for a player to generate some amount of damage, or at least maybe try to attack. Mm-hmm. So if we kind of think about this in the video game world, a lot of times players might have an armor class. All right, because in real life, if I'm wearing real like plate armor, I'm just wearing sheets of steel, okay, and you come up with fists, okay. I'm just going to stand there and kind of laugh at you, right? Okay, as opposed to if I'm wearing like one of those ugly Christmas sweaters, that's my armor, and you come up with a dagger, things are going to go way less good.
Let's make it like premium Kevlar vest.
It'll be a Christmas sweater that it's a Kevlar vest hidden as a Christmas sweater.
That's just really good. Looks.
It's like, what is that? Well, it's impenetrable. All right. So a player might have an armor class. That's kind of how tough they are. And maybe when you try to attack a player, you have to clear that armor class in order for the blow to hit. So the idea would be the way an attack might work is if I'm fighting Blaine here, I would roll some dice so let's say he has an armor class of 7. All right, I would roll some dice. That's out of 20, dude. Okay. Okay, so I would roll a d20, find out whether I hit. So if I roll at least a 7, then I'll be able to hit him. Okay. Then we need to roll again to determine how hard I hit him, and that'll be my damage roll. So maybe my damage roll is 1d6 plus 1 or something like that. Something that, depending on how many hit points we give him, something that will not kill him in one blow, but also not make a fight last forever. we want that for our little example, right? Okay, so an attack requires 2 steps. I try to hit him, determine whether or not it clears armor class. If the answer is yes, then I generate damage and actually hit him. If I don't clear his armor class, then the idea is like I swing and miss. All right, so he takes no damage. I don't have to generate damage, so it's that type of thing. All right, so we are going to have functions for our players that are going to allow us to do this cadence. All right, so one thing I'm going to do is that maybe I don't know his armor class. It's not like he's walking around with like a big sticker on his shoulder that says, roll a 7 and beat me. All right, so I'm going to have a function that I will call on him called try to hit or something like that, So we'll have a try to hit function that takes in some kind of roll, and he's going to compare that. So player compares roll to his armor class. We'll just say to his AC. All right, and returns true if it hits and false otherwise. All right, so I'm going to try to hit him. He's going to then spit back and say, yes or no, you hit me. All right, so then depending on that, I will then generate some damage, right? So I'm going to have a function called generate damage, and this is a player rolls some dice, rolls their dice collection for their damage and produces and returns the number. Okay, so one thing, so if him and I are both players, we're both instances of the player class. Excuse me. We're both instances of the player class. I will generate some damage. Now he needs to be able to take some damage. Okay? So we're going to give him a function. Well, we're going to give all players this function because when the tables are turned, he's going to be generating damage and I'll be taking damage. All right? So take damage. Maybe he takes in an amount. And this is player reduces their HP by amount. Something like that. Okay. All right? Now, we also probably want to have a function where a player can report whether or not they're dead. All right? So maybe we have a function called isDead. That's kind of like you walking up, you kind of kick him, like, you dead, buddy? And if he groans a little bit, he's not dead. If there's no groan, it's not good. Okay, but we'll say in our game he's just unconscious. All right. So no, he's dead. All right, so this is going to return true if HP is less than or equal to 0 and false otherwise. So if he has at least 1 hit point left, he's not dead. Otherwise, he's dead. All right, because he might have had 1 hit point at the beginning of this last swing, and now he's at negative 13. He's very, very dead at that point. Okay? But in any case, a player, even beyond the grave, will be able to report whether or not they're dead. Okay, that's the one last little functionality you'll still have. All right. So a player will be able to ask a player, "Are you dead?" And he'll be able to return true or false, whether or not they are dead. We don't have to know what their actual hit points are. We just have to. He has to know what his hit points are and whether or not they are
Gone.
whether or not they're gone or gone enough to be dead or whatever it is. Okay. So if we kind of go back and forth here, so if I'm attacking him first, I'm going to try to hit. He tells me whether or not that was successful. Assuming he says true, I hit him. Then I'll generate some damage and follow through. When I generate my damage, I will then pass it to his take damage. So if I generate a 5, I'll pass it to his take damage, giving him a 5. He'll reduce his hit points by 5. Okay. Then maybe I'll ask the question, "Are you dead?" And he'll say, "Nope." And then tables are turned, so he will try to hit me. So he'll generate a roll on his side, pass it to my try to hit. I'll return true or false whether he hits. Let's assume the answer is yes. Then he'll generate some damage, and I will take the damage that he generated. All right, so we both have the exact same functions. We're just using them against each other. Okay? Well, sometimes we're calling our own, then sometimes we're passing that. So in this case, I would have called my own function generate damage. And I would have passed the result to his function take damage. Okay, so we're going to have 2 players sitting here, player 1, player 2. Okay? And we'll just keep going until one of the players is dead, is the idea here. All right? Now, we're not even implementing the game yet. We're just implementing what a player is capable of doing. So until we start taking advantage of these things, he's just kind of chilling. Okay? So let's go ahead and let's implement players. This is kind of the approach when you're dealing with object-oriented programming. You kind of think about, what's the object I want to create? We just planned it out here. Now we're going to take this and we're going to convert it into a Python class. All right? So we're going to have a class called player. So here's our class player. And we're going to have a constructor for a player. All functions always take self. Now we decided that a player will have a name. Now we also said that a player is going to have a hit points and a armor class. But what we're going to do is we're going to internally generate those. When we create a player, all we're going to need to do is provide the name of that player. And then that player will internally in the constructor figure out what his hit points and what his armor class is. We'll probably just roll a couple of random numbers. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say self.name. This is the name belonging to this particular player is equal to whatever name was passed in. Now we need to get our hit points. Now, what we can do is we can create a dice collection with a roll formula for our hit points. And similarly, we can create a dice collection with a roll formula for our armor class. So what do we think hit points should be?
100.
Just always 100? That's not very random. Does everybody starts off with 100? Maybe 2d20 or 3d20? If I roll 3 20-sided die and I add those together, that might be his hit points, right? And maybe you roll 3 20-sided die, that's your hit points. Those are probably going to be different numbers. They might be in the same ballpark, but sometimes you artificially roll low. I mean, you could have 3 hit points. Okay, you should not be in a street fight. Okay, you should be in a library somewhere. All right, with 3 hit points. But we could say 3d20, or we can, if you want to have your number kind of close to 100, you can say 3d20 plus 40, something like that. Now we don't have the plus part in our roll formula, right?
I'm not currently.
Okay, so we'll have to kind of fake it for ours. So we'll go ahead and we're going to create a dice collection. So we're going to say hit point roller is equal to dice collection. And we pass this guy the roll formula. So we're going to pass this guy, what do we say? 3d20. And then we'll just artificially add 40 to that on the back side. So that's going to be our dice collection for our HP roller. Notice that this is not self.hp roller. This is just a local variable that I'm going to use to roll my hit points. Mm-hmm. Then I'll say self.hp is equal to HP. Actually, I need to go ahead and roll because of the way we wrote this. We'll say HP roller.roll. So that'll roll our hit points. And then we'll say self.hp, this is our number of hit points, is equal to HP roller.recent sum. So that is the sum of our 3d20. And then we'll add 40 to whatever that number is. Okay, so this is our roll we recently made, which is going to be some value of 3d20. So we'll roll a d20, another d20, and another d20. We'll add those guys together. We're going to get some number between 3 and 60. Right? So that's what's going to come out of what I have highlighted right there. Then we're going to add 40 to it. So the ultimate thing will be 43 to 100 is the range of hit points that our players can have. All right, so that would be our hit points. Now, armor class, a lot of times armor class is a d20. What I'm actually going to do here, because we don't want a situation, if we roll a natural 20, well, we do say greater than or equal to. A situation we could run into here is that we could have somebody who actually has an armor class of 20. Which means that the only way you can hit that person is with a 20. Maybe that's okay. That's the name of the game. Okay. Don't show up to a fist fight wearing plate armor. Well, we'll go with it. That's fine. So we're gonna say our AC roller is going to be a dice collection. So notice here that we're using our object. We're using our dice collection object to generate different kinds of rolls. Now, I'm only going to need these rolls one time. All right, that's why I'm not storing them up top. But we will give this guy a damage roller here in a second. So our AC roller is going to be our dice collection. And we'll roll a 1d20 for our armor class, which will give us some value between 1 and 20. Okay? Then we'll do AC roller dot roll. So that'll roll the dice once. And then we'll say self.ac is equal to AC roller dot recent sum. That's what his AC is. That make sense? All right. Now we wrote our dice collection this particular way because we wanted to potentially have keep track of both the sum and all the individual rolls. All right. That's why we're using this kind of a little bit weird, where we kind of roll it and don't have any answer then. Then we look at either the sum or the rolls or both if we're interested in both of them. So that's why we have to roll it roll it itself here. And then we ask ourselves, what was the sum of that roll we just made? Okay, so now we have our name set, we have our hit points set, and we have our armor class set. Now, we could go ahead and have players have slightly modified damage rolls. So what I can do is I can go ahead and create a... maybe my damage, when I do damage for this player, maybe the damage is 1d6, and then maybe we add 3 to that, or add some random number to that. Something like that. Does that kind of make some sense? Maybe that's called a modifier, so that means everybody doesn't always swing the same strength, as he says the name of the game, right? Okay, we both show up with the thing that can do up to 6 damage, whatever it is, a stick, a baseball bat, whatever bring to the, okay? And then at the time of creation, some of those baseball bats are imbued with additional power. Right? It's kind of, you know way too much about it. You put some barbed wire on there. I mean, that works well. I mean, I prefer high grit sandpaper, but mean, barbed wire leaves a mark. Sandpaper, you can play that off as something else.
Drag him around in my car for
Yeah, that would never get in a fight with you. This must be a Kenosha thing.
The scene's right there. You got to be ready.
Oh, so there's this is kind of like Packers versus Bears, or I guess
they connect.
more like Packers versus Vikings, maybe.
Yeah.
Packers versus Bears has fizzled out. The Bears have been bad for too long now. At some point, those tables need to turn.
Good for another 5 years.
Well, whatever it is, they'll eventually be good again. But that's no longer an interesting battle. Bears just kind of accept that, okay, maybe we'll win a game here and there, but it's just not good. But Vikings are pretty decent, so now it's Packers, Vikings hate. So that's Kenosha Racine.
Yeah, but there's some Kenosha guys in the Vikings. There's the defensive back. He's a corner. My dad actually taught him.
Oh, he's from Kenosha.
Yeah, he's
Oh, okay, interesting. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to give ourselves two pieces of information. So here, let's go back and put this into our plan a little bit. We're going to give ourselves a field for our damage roller, and then we're going to give our field for a damage modifier. All right, so maybe our damage roller is going to be a roller capable of rolling 1d6. And then our modifier will be some number between 1 and 4. Maybe we roll a d4 to create that modifier, but that's only a one-time thing. Mm-hmm. Or do we have a random modifier?
Like a crit.
Yeah, so like every single time we roll our damage, we roll a d6 plus a d4. We add those two together, and that's the amount of damage. Do we want that, or do we want to have an always modifier? Like, 1d4, so your modifier is either always a 1, or always a 2, or always a 3, or always a 4. Let's do that. That way we have an int, and we have a... Okay. All right, so we're only going to generate our modifier once. But our damage roller is going to be a dice collection. That's going to be something that every single time we go to do damage, we're going to roll that same dice collection to give us the damage this time around. Okay, so we'll say self.damage roller is going to be equal to a dice collection, and we're going to say we're going to roll 1d6 for our damage under general circumstances. Okay, then we're going to have a damage modifier, so we'll call this guy modifier is equal to dice collection. Call this guy 1d4. Now notice this is a local variable. I'm not attaching this to a field for the class. I'm not saying self.modifier. This variable modifier dies when this init function is over, when this constructor is over. I'm just creating it to use it for one moment. Okay, because I'm going to roll a single d4, which is going to give me my forever modifier for this guy. So then I'll say modifier dot roll. So I'll go ahead and roll it once. I'll say self dot damage modifier is equal to modifier dot recent sum. So that's what I rolled recently when I rolled my 1d4.
Do we have to make the after dice collection for self roller or damage roller strings as well and the modifiers? Or we
why strings?
So it goes through the dice collection.
That's how we set up the dice collection
So
to take in values, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So like what I did up here, I just had a bug here. Yeah, these guys take in strings. I give it my formula as a string, and then it converts that formula into the correct number of dice and the correct number of sides. Yeah, good catch. All right, so even though this is a lot of lines, it seems like, they all do simple things, right? My name is going to be whatever name was passed in. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab some dice out of my dice bag, and I'm going to roll those dice. All right, and then I'm going to set my hit points equal to whatever I just rolled, plus 40. Then I'm going to grab some more dice out of my bag, and I'm going to roll those dice. Then I'm going to set my armor class equal to whatever I just rolled. Then I'm going to grab some more dice out of my bag, but I'm actually going to keep these dice on hand, okay? Because these are going to stick with me. So I'm going to say, I'm going to roll damage pretty often because I expect to, to hit you often. Is the idea here. So I'm going to kind of keep that to the side so I have the ability to roll those dice whenever I want. All right, so that'll be my damage roller. And then I'm also going to I'm going to grab a couple of extra, one extra dice out of the bag. I'm going to go ahead and roll it, and I'm going to give myself one value, just a static integer for my modifier. Okay? Now I also would probably benefit, just so I don't have to create it new each time, I would probably benefit from a AC roller, or an attack roller, if I want to call it that. Because I'm going to roll 1d20 every single time I try to hit him. That make sense? Okay. Now, we sort of have ourselves covered with that because of this try to hit function. But it might make sense for us to not always have to create a new dice inside of try to hit. Let's actually do it that way this time. That way we can see maybe the trade-off, just so you can see the example of that. So we'll say this is good. At this point, a player has a name, a player has their hit points. So anytime I say self dot here, that's something that's a field that the player will own from this point forward. So a player is going to have their name, they're going to have their hit points, they're going to have their armor class, they're going to have their damage roller, that whenever they do damage, they're going to use that guy. And they're going to have their damage modifier that they'll always add to their damage roll. Okay? All this other stuff in here, so these two lines here, those disappear. Well, this variable disappears after this function's done. This variable disappears after this function's done. And this variable here disappears after this function's done. Okay, these guys were local variables, so they lived and died with this function. All right, so when we first create a player, he's going to have all this information that he's just carrying along. So this set up all of his fields. So now all these guys now have values. I'm going to get rid of this attack roller because we decided not to create that now. Okay, so now we have some functions we need to write. So we're going to have a function for try to hit. So we're going to define try to hit, and this guy is not going to take any parameters, so we still have to have the self in there. All right, so this is where we roll a single d20 and return that value, because we are trying to hit our opponent. Okay, so I'm going to roll a d20. I'm going to then hand him the value. Says, does this hit you? He's going to have a function called, here. So we're going to call his try to hit, passing it a roll. So this guy does take a value as we've designed it. So the idea here is that somebody is going to pass me some number, and I'm going to decide whether that hits me. All right? Because when I try to hit, I'm going to roll a d20, and I'm going to try to hit him. So I'm going to call his try to hit, pass it my 16 or whatever I rolled. He's going to compare that to his armor class and decide and return yes or no, true or false, did that hit me? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and return roll greater than or equal to self.ac. That's what try to hit does. So he returns true if the roll that was provided to him is at least as big as his armor class, and false otherwise. That makes sense? Okay, so we're two individual players. I'm an instance of player, he's an instance of player. It's my turn to take a swing at him. So I'm going to generate, I'm going to roll between 1 and 20. Somehow. We'll have to figure out how that logic's going to happen. And then I'm going to call, let's just say his instance is called Blaine. So we're going to say Blaine.try to hit, and I'll pass him the 16. Okay, he'll catches the 16, then he's going to look inside and decide, does that hit me? He compares it to his armor class, and he goes, oh, yeah, it hit me. I got 20. You don't have a 20 armor class. You're wearing a hackathon T-shirt, dude. That is not a 20 armor class. It's a -3. Okay. All right. So he's going to say, okay, that hit me. So he's going to return true. So once he gives me back that true value, then I'm going to say, okay, I hit him. Now I got to decide how hard I hit him. All right. So that's when I'm going to generate. Go ahead.
So the roll greater than equals to self.ac, that'll boil down to either true or false.
True or false. Yep. This is a Boolean expression. If you don't like it written in one line like this, which this is the correct way to write it, let's say. But if you don't like that, you can say this. You can do if roll is greater than or equal to self.ac, return true, else return false. A little bit long-winded way of saying the same thing, and it's actually kind of redundant because we're saying if this is true, return true. If this is false, return false. So we could just return this value, right?
Yeah.
But if you like this logic better, and many beginning programmers will, okay, they'll like this logic better because you feel like I am actually asking a question and then I'm responding based on the answer to that question. That's okay. This is not wrong. Just a little bit inefficient, but we don't care. It's not a big deal. All right, if that other thing just is, not, it's confusing to you, go with this. All right, I'll leave it like this for now. All right, so that's our try to hit. Then we need to have a generate damage. So every player knows how to generate damage, so we'll do def generate damage. And this one takes no parameters. And the damage is going to be his damage roller's roll, recent sum, plus his modifier. Right?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to say self.damageroller.roll. So we'll go ahead and we'll grab my dice I had sitting over to the side here. I kind of kept them with me because I'm going to need this often. I'll go ahead and roll it. Then I'm going to say damage amount, we'll just break this down to individual steps, is equal to self.damageroller.recent sum. So that is the sum associated with my recent roll. Then I need to further augment damage amount by also providing it my modifier. So then I'll say damage amount plus equals self.damage modifier. That was that number we generated up here that was some number between 1 and 4. That's what these three lines did. All right, so this is the difference between the baseball bat being wrapped in barbed wire or being wrapped in, I don't know, tissue paper or something like that.
Soap the bat and kerosene.
Okay, so ultimately now my damage amount, it started off as just my sum from my damage roll, and then I added to it my modifier. So now I'll go ahead and return my damage amount. Okay? And again, just like this previous function, we're writing this in more lines than we need to write it in, but we're breaking it down into each little individual step. And that's okay. All right? So that's how we will generate damage. Now, these are just abilities that players have. Okay? A player we can just walk up and say, look, I'm going to generate some damage, and never use it on anybody. Okay? This is just an ability that a player has. Now, a player also has the ability to take some damage. So he will take in some amount of damage. He doesn't care how that damage was generated. We intend on generating that damage from our generate damage function, but I could just walk up and say take 3 damage. And he'll take 3 damage. He doesn't care where that number came from. Amount comes from somewhere. All it has to do is be a number. In fact, we can even use take damage for healing. If I tell him to take -7 damage, he just got healed for 7. Kind of make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So what will this guy do? He's going to reduce his hit points by amount. So let's say self.hp minus equals amount. That's all take damage does. Update my hit points to be a little bit less than they used to be. How much less? Amount less.
Gotcha.
All right. So that's take damage. Lastly is dead. Returns true if your hit points are greater than 0 and false otherwise. If your hit points are 0, you're if you're greater than 0, you're alive, so you return false. So we'll say def is dead. We'll ask the question if self.hp is greater than 0, then I'm going to return false. I'm not dead. Else, well, we could. I mean, you could. You're saying the exact same thing. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's fair to say one is better or worse than the other. All right. So this would be kind of a long-winded way of saying this. The short version of this would have been to say return not self.hp greater than 0. Let's see. Not in this is not a thing, right? Isn't it not?
Yeah.
I think it's not like that. So this guy right here is going to be some value. This is going to be either true or false, but it'll be true when the hit points is greater than 0. But when the hit points is greater than 0, we want it to actually return false. So if we say not true, that turns into a false. Not false will turn into a true. So this would be the one-liner version of this. But if you like to spell it out with your question, which probably is easier for most of you, this is fine. If my hit points are greater than 0, I am not dead, so return false. Otherwise, I am dead, return true. Make sense? Or if you want to write it, if it's less than or equal to 0, I am dead. Otherwise, I'm not dead. This is the exact same output. You're just asking the question about whether or not you're dead first. So the one-liner version of this would be return self.hp less than or equal to 0. That guy will return true if you're dead and false if you're not dead.
That really gets confused when people say like that's still confusing me.
Oh, which is okay, because that's why this one, this one should be less confusing, right?
Yeah.
As it's written, we're asking the question. If I don't have enough hit points, return true. I'm dead. Otherwise, return false. All right, so that is dead. All right, so that should be all of our functions. Now, I'm also going to give myself one additional function here called display. And this guy is going to display to the screen the current status of a player. So we'll show his hit points, what hit points he has left over. We're going to go ahead and show his armor class too, just so we have some additional information. So we'll say def display. All right, and this guy's just going to print to the screen. We're going to print self.name. Then we'll print HP self.hp, so that's how much hit points are left. We'll print AC self. I did call it AC, right? Yep, self.ac. So that'll be my hit points, my armor class, and if we're really interested, we can say attack modifier, just so we can spit out all the stuff we have here. Self dot attack modifier. Is that what I called it? Damage modifier. This guy. Oh. Why did I even bother copying if I was just going to copy again? There's my damage modifier. So whenever a player displays himself, they'll display their name, they'll display their current hit points, they'll display their armor class, and they'll display their attack modifier. Okay, so that is our player object. So then down here, I'm going to go ahead. This is where we were testing all of our stuff. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a. Go ahead.
For the when you're printing it, don't you have to use commas if it's integers that you're concatenating?
Possibly. This is an integer. That's a string. So I'd actually just need to do this. Yeah. Because we can't concatenate a string and a number. So we need to convert that number to a string. All right, so now let's create a couple of players down here at the bottom. So we'll say player Blaine. Actually, this is not the right language. We'll say Blaine. You have an E, right?
Yes.
Is equal to player. And we'll give it the name Blaine. And then we'll say Mike is equal to player Mike. Then we'll say Blaine dot display and Mike dot display. So we're just going to generate our couple of players and then tell each one to display themselves, so we know their initial circumstance. Let's go in here. Just going to clear the screen real quick. What didn't you like? Oh. Misspelled my variable Blaine. All right, so here's Blaine. He has 68 hit points. He has an armor class of 5, hence the t-shirt, dude. Okay? Okay, and he has an attack modifier of 2, so probably a little bit of like the light duty sandpaper, I'm guessing. All right, so that's Blaine's character. And my character have a few less hit points. You know, I went for a run this morning. So that's a little draining. Right? Okay, armor class of 9. I got the tie on. That's the extra.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, it's a blunt force trauma type of. My attack modifier, though, is a 4. We decide that's barbed wire plus fire. Okay. So it's both of those. Okay, not only does it burn and stab, it melts. So it's okay. But now we'll see here, if I run this again, we see that we get different numbers. And oh, Blaine. Oh my gosh. That is problematic. It is impossible for me to miss. I only have to tie that one in order to hit you. Okay, so yeah. Although, you know, he did go a little tougher there with his weapon, though, with the modifier.
Not much. I don't have some good rolls.
All right, so you see we're getting different random numbers every time we run this guy. Oh.
Man, that's a
Oh.
19. Yes.
He came ready to fight. All right. So, what we want to do for homework.
Isn't there HP after every attack, though?
We're not attacking yet. Yeah, all we're doing is displaying. I'm just running the program multiple times. I'm just creating 2 players and displaying their initial stats. All right. So now what we're going to do is, well, now what you're going to do for your homework is write the logic to have Blaine and Mike fight to the death.
Who will win?
They should keep attacking until one of them dies, and then the winner, well, actually, why don't we just do this? And then the current stats of both should be displayed, and we'll be able to see who died. One of them will have hit points that are 0 or less. The other one will still be standing. All right. For this example, you may assume Blaine goes first. All right. So you don't have to figure out who gets to go first if you don't want to. You could just say Blaine gets to attack first. And then Mike, then Blaine, then Mike, then Blaine. And after each individual attack, you have to ask the question, is another attack necessary? All right. Does that make sense? So now you're going to use our objects we just created to create a little death match. You don't have to put this in an object yet. We'll kind of build this in. Just write the logic down here that it's going to be a loop, right? We keep doing something until somebody dies. All right, that type of thing.
Okay.
Make sense? Questions, comments, concerns, bribes. I'll put this code up on Slack right now and put the assignment up on Blackboard.
When's the assignment due?
Let's do it in 2 days.
Okay.
Right? Friday. No, you'll have a much harder one due Monday.
Yeah, 'cause it's over weekend.
Yeah, you have a whole weekend for that one.
It's like,
Hey, what is this?
Should be doing anything
This is
with
the
that
amateur
code.
hour?
You should be doing anything with that code.
What's this?